Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten corners of remote small towns across Canada, where isolated communities sit surrounded by endless wilderness, silent highways, frozen lakes, and dark forests where help does not reach. Hidden within these quiet towns are 7 disturbing horror stories, encounters so terrifying that the people who live them still struggle to explain what really happened. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of remote Canada's forgotten towns, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Daniel Mercer, and this happened when I was living in a tiny Canadian town called Ravens Creek, a place so small that everyone knew each other's business. Back then, I worked the night shift at a roadside gas station just outside town. It sat alone on a quiet stretch of highway, surrounded by dense forest and fields that turned into endless white snow every winter. Most nights were quiet. Truckers passing through, maybe a late traveler stopping for coffee. But that winter was different. People in town had already been talking about strange things happening outside the outskirts. Livestock disappearing, dogs barking into the woods late at night. One old farmer claimed he saw a man standing in his field at 3 in the morning during a blizzard, just standing there, perfectly still. We laughed it off, until the night I saw him too. It was nearly 2:40 a.m. when the gas station doors slid open automatically, even though no car had pulled in. And a man covered in snow slowly walked inside. At first, I assumed he had come from a broken-down car somewhere down the highway. But something felt wrong immediately. The man didn't look cold. His clothes were thin, just a gray shirt and dark pants, completely soaked with melting snow. His boots left wet prints across the tile floor as he walked toward the counter. But the strangest part was his face. He looked pale, unnaturally pale, like someone who had been outside in freezing weather for hours. Yet he wasn't shivering, not even a little. "Evening," I said cautiously. The man didn't respond right away. He just stared at me, his eyes slightly unfocused, like he was trying to remember where he was. Then he spoke. "Is this Ravens Creek?" His voice sounded hoarse, like someone who hadn't spoken in a long time. I nodded slowly. "Yeah. Town's about 5 minutes down the road." He looked toward the dark highway through the glass doors, and then he said something that made my stomach drop. "I've been walking there for 3 days. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. 3 days? I repeated slowly, leaning slightly forward on the counter. The man nodded faintly. Snow continued melting from his hair, dripping down onto the floor in small dark spots. But his eyes never blinked. They stayed fixed on the glass doors behind me, staring out toward the empty highway, like something out there still had his attention. "You walked for 3 days?" I asked again. The roads had been buried under snowstorms all week. Temperatures had dropped to nearly minus 25 degrees. No one could survive outside that long without proper gear. Yet here he stood, breathing slowly, looking strangely calm. "I woke up in the forest," he said quietly. The way he said it made my chest tighten. "Woke up?" I asked. He nodded again. I don't remember how I got there. Something about that answer sent a cold shiver up my spine, because the forest he was pointing toward through the window stretched for hundreds of miles, and people who got lost out there usually weren't found alive. I tried to keep my voice calm, but something deep in my gut was already telling me that this situation wasn't normal. "Do you want me to call someone?" I asked. "Police, maybe an ambulance?" The man finally looked directly at me. Up close, his eyes looked strange. They were light gray, almost colorless, and there was something hollow about them, like someone who hadn't slept in days. "No," he said quickly. The answer came too fast. "I just need to get home." "Where's home?" I asked. He opened his mouth, then stopped. For several seconds, he just stood there in silence. Then slowly, confusion spread across his face. I don't remember." A long, uncomfortable silence filled the gas station. Outside, the wind howled across the highway, shaking the building slightly. And that was when the automatic door suddenly slid open again. Cold air rushed inside. Both of us turned toward it. But no one was standing there. Just darkness and the endless snow-covered road. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. The automatic door remained open, letting freezing wind swirl loose snow across the floor. I stepped around the counter cautiously and pressed the control button to close it again. The glass panels slid shut with a dull mechanical hum, sealing the warmth back inside the station. When I turned around, the man was still standing exactly where he had been before. But now, he looked tense. His eyes were locked on the dark road outside, like he was expecting something to appear from the storm. "Did you see someone out there?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "No," he whispered, "but I heard them." My stomach tightened. "Heard who?" The man hesitated. For several seconds, he seemed to struggle with the words, like he wasn't sure how to explain it. Then finally, he spoke. "The people in the trees." The wind outside howled again, rattling the windows hard enough to make the glass vibrate. And suddenly, the quiet gas station felt much smaller. "The people in the trees?" I repeated carefully. The man nodded, his eyes still fixed on the forest line across the highway. "They were following me," he said. Something about the way he spoke made it clear he believed every word. "How many?" I asked. "I don't know," he replied quietly. "I never saw them clearly." The chill ran down my back. "What do you mean?" He slowly raised a shaking hand and pointed toward the woods outside. They stayed between the trees. Every time I turned around, I could see movement, shapes stepping behind trunks. I felt my throat go dry. "But they never came closer," he continued. "Just watch me walking." The fluorescent lights above us flickered once, briefly dimming the room. Both of us instinctively looked up. When the light stabilized again, the man suddenly leaned closer to the window. His voice dropped to a terrified whisper. "They're closer now." I slowly stepped closer to the window, trying to see what he was looking at. Outside, the snowstorm had grown heavier. Thick white flakes swirled under the dim yellow lights of the gas station canopy, making the empty highway look like it was dissolving into a wall of moving fog. At first, I didn't see anything. Just the forest line across the road. Tall black trees standing motionless in the darkness. "You see them?" the man whispered. I squinted harder, and that was when I noticed it. Something moved between the trees. At first, it was only a shadow shifting behind a trunk, then another, and another. My heartbeat immediately sped up. There were multiple shapes standing just inside the forest line. They were tall, thin, and completely still. From that distance, I couldn't see faces, but I could clearly tell they were watching the gas station, watching us. "Those are the people," the man whispered. And the moment he said that, one of the shapes slowly stepped forward. The figure stepped just far enough out of the trees for the light from the gas station to barely reach it. My breath caught in my throat. It looked like a person, but something about its shape was wrong. Its arms hung too long at its sides, almost reaching its knees. its head tilted slightly in an unnatural way, like its neck didn't bend properly. And the worst part was how still it stood, completely motionless. Behind it, the other shapes remained hidden among the trees. "How long have they been there?" I asked quietly. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he whispered something that made my skin crawl. "They started following me the night I woke up." The figure across the road suddenly took another slow step forward. Snow crunched faintly under its feet. Then, another shape moved beside it. Now there were two of them standing at the edge of the highway, and both of them were staring directly at the gas station doors. My first instinct was to lock the doors. I rushed over to the control panel near the counter and hit the security switch that sealed the automatic entrance. A heavy metal lock slid into place with a loud clunk. When I turned back toward the window, my chest tightened. The two figures had crossed the highway. They were standing just beyond the gas station lights now, half hidden in the swirling snow. From this distance, I could see them more clearly, and the sight made my stomach twist. They looked human, but stretched, like their limbs were slightly too long for their bodies. Their heads tilted slowly from side to side, as if studying the building. Then one of them lifted its arm, not to wave, but to point, directly at the man standing beside me. The pale stranger suddenly stepped backward, panic spreading across his face. "They found me," he whispered. Before I could say anything, both figures began slowly walking toward the gas station doors. My heart pounded as the figures reached the edge of the gas station parking lot. Their footsteps were slow but deliberate, crunching through the snow as they approached the glass doors. But something strange happened. The moment they stepped under the bright canopy lights, they stopped. Both figures froze completely still. For several long seconds, they simply stood there, staring inside. Then, slowly, both of them turned their heads toward the man beside me. Not toward me, not toward the store, toward him. The pale stranger looked terrified now. His breathing became uneven, and his hands trembled as he backed away from the door. "They won't come inside," he whispered. "Why?" I asked. He looked at me with hollow eyes. "Because they already know where I am." And then he said something I will never forget. "I wasn't walking away from them." He paused. "I was leading them here." The lights flickered again, and outside, more shapes began emerging from the trees. My name is Emily Carter, and this happened 3 winters ago when I moved to a quiet Canadian town called Hollow Ridge. It was the kind of place people moved to when they wanted peace and quiet. Small houses lined the snow-covered streets, and everyone waved when you passed them in town. I had taken a job as a librarian, hoping for a slower life after years of living in Toronto. The house I rented sat at the edge of town, an old 2-story place surrounded by tall pine trees. The landlord warned me that it had been empty for almost a year, but the rent was cheap, and I didn't think much of it. At first, everything seemed normal. The house creaked a little at night, which I assumed was just the cold weather settling into the wood. Old homes always made strange noises, but a week after I moved in, I discovered something strange in the basement. There was a heavy wooden door down there, a door that didn't appear on any part of the house plans. And the worst part, it was locked from the outside. I didn't even notice the door the first few days. The basement was mostly unfinished. Bare concrete walls, a washing machine, and old wooden shelves covered in dust. The only reason I went down there at all was because I needed to store some boxes after unpacking. That was when I saw it. The door sat at the far end of the basement wall, partly hidden behind a stack of old boards. It looked much older than the rest of the house. The wood was dark and cracked, and a thick metal latch had been installed on the outside, like someone wanted to keep it sealed shut. At first, I assumed it was just an old storage room. But when I pulled the boards away and stepped closer, something immediately felt wrong. The air near the door was colder, not normal basement cold. A deep, unnatural chill that made the hairs on my arms stand up. And then I heard it. A faint sound coming from the other side of the door. 3 slow knocks. At first, I froze. I stood there in the dim basement light, staring at the old wooden door while my mind tried to convince me I had imagined the sound. Basements were full of strange noises, pipes knocking, wood shifting, wind moving through the foundation. But this wasn't like that. The sound had been deliberate. 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. My heart began beating faster as I stepped closer to the door. The cold air around it felt even stronger now, like standing next to an open freezer. "Hello?" I called cautiously. My voice sounded small in the empty basement. For several seconds, there was only silence. Then suddenly, knock, knock, knock. The exact same rhythm. I jumped back, my pulse racing. Something had clearly responded to me, and that meant one impossible thing. There was someone on the other side of that door, but the house had only one basement. There shouldn't have been any space behind that wall at all. I forced myself to take a step closer. Every instinct in my body was telling me to run upstairs and pretend the whole thing had never happened. But curiosity won. "Is someone in there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Silence answered me. For nearly 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then slowly, quietly, I heard something different. Not knocking, scratching. A faint dragging sound coming from the other side of the door, like fingernails moving across the wood. The noise continued for several seconds before stopping suddenly. My stomach twisted with unease. This wasn't normal. If someone had somehow gotten trapped behind the door, they would be shouting for help, banging on the wall, doing anything to get attention. But whoever, or whatever, was on the other side wasn't trying to escape. It sounded like it was simply testing the door. And then, just as I began stepping backward toward the stairs, a quiet voice whispered from behind the wood. "Emily." I had never told anyone my name. I froze where I stood, my hands gripping the railing leading down the stairs. The voice had whispered my name so clearly, so intimately, that my mind immediately screamed that this was impossible. I had never told anyone in Hollow Ridge that I lived here. No one knew my full name yet. "Emily," it whispered again, dragging the final syllable like it was savoring my fear. My chest tightened, and I felt my stomach churn. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. I slowly reached for the old door, my fingertips brushing the cold wood. The second I touched it, the scratching started again. This time, it was louder, more insistent, almost angry. It moved in patterns I couldn't understand, like it was trying to communicate something. And then, the whisper came again. But this time, it wasn't my name. "Don't look behind you." I spun around, but the basement was empty. Only shadows flickered against the walls, distorted by the swinging light bulb above. I stumbled back, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the whispering behind the door. The air felt heavier now, suffocating, and my breaths came in short gasps. I couldn't tell whether the voice was coming from the door or inside my head. The scratching intensified. It was moving rapidly now, almost frantically. I could hear small cracks in the wood, as if something was trying to push through. I took a step back toward the stairs, but my foot slipped on the cold concrete. The whisper came again, this time desperate. "Emily, open it. You need to see." I froze completely. My mind screamed that I shouldn't, that opening it would be a terrible mistake. But I couldn't ignore it. Something inside me, a mix of fear and curiosity, was drawing me toward the door. Then, the latch on the outside creaked slightly. Someone, or something, was trying to open it from the other side. And suddenly, the basement door shook violently, rattling in its frame as though whatever was behind it wanted freedom. The basement air felt like it had thickened, pressing against my chest. My hands trembled as I backed toward the stairs, unable to tear my eyes from the door. The rattling continued, louder now, each jolt sending a shiver of panic through me. The whispering had stopped, replaced by a low, guttural humming that seemed to vibrate through the floor. I wanted to run, to scream, but my legs refused. Something inside me screamed that if I didn't face it, I would regret it forever. Slowly, I inched closer, keeping my flashlight steady as the beam wavered across the rough wooden surface of the door. And then I saw it. A thin crack forming along the edge where the latch held it closed. The crack widened slightly with each shake, revealing darkness that seemed to move on its own, twisting and curling like smoke. I swallowed hard, my skin crawling. Whatever was behind that door wasn't human, yet it knew me. And now, it was so close it could almost touch me through the crack. I tried to back away, but my foot hit a box, sending it toppling across the floor with a loud crash. The sound echoed through the basement. Immediately, the rattling stopped. Silence fell heavy, almost suffocating. I froze, expecting the worst. Then, from the crack in the door, I saw a single pale, twisted hand slide into view. Its fingers were unnaturally long, claw-like, and tipped with blackened nails. My breath caught in my throat, and I could feel the hair on my arms stand on end. "Emily." The voice came again, softer now, almost pleading, yet somehow full of menace. I stumbled backward, tripping over the stairs and landing hard on my shoulder. The flashlight clattered across the floor, spinning its weak beam toward the door. The hand withdrew. The rattling resumed, faster and more frantic, like whatever was inside was growing impatient. And then the whisper pierced the basement, chilling me to the bone. "Open it, or it's too late." I scrambled backward, my shoulder aching from hitting the concrete, my mind screaming at me to run. Every instinct told me the basement held something impossible, something that shouldn't exist. But the voice, the whisper, kept repeating my name, pulling me forward. I slowly crawled toward the door, heart hammering. The rattling and scratching grew louder, more urgent, as if whatever was behind the wood knew I was afraid. I could feel it pressing through the crack, the chill intensifying, like ice was crawling up my arms. Then, the latch gave a sudden click. My stomach dropped. The door began to swing open. Slowly, deliberately. A shadow poured out, dark and writhing, taller than any person should be, with long clawed fingers reaching for me. The voice whispered one final time, echoing in my head. "I've been waiting for you." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. And before I could move, the shadow lunged forward. The shadow fell over me, blackness pressing from all sides. I tried to move, to push it away, but my body refused. Time seemed to stretch, each second an eternity. The scratching, the whispering, and the low hum all merged into a deafening cacophony inside my head. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. I opened my eyes, gasping, and the shadow was gone. The door hung slightly ajar, creaking gently as if nothing had ever been there. The basement was empty, silent, cold, but otherwise normal. I bolted upstairs, grabbed my keys, and left the house without looking back. The landlord never asked why I left after only a few weeks. I never told anyone what happened. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still hear the scratching coming from that old wooden door. And sometimes, in my dreams, it whispers my name again. My name is Marcus Lyle, and this happened the night I was driving home from a late shift in Frostwood, a small Canadian town tucked deep in the northern woods. The town was almost too quiet, the streets empty except for the occasional snowplow. Streetlights flickered along the winding roads, casting long shadows across the thick layer of snow that had fallen that evening. I was tired, my eyes heavy, and the only sound was the tires crunching against the ice. The highway stretched endlessly through dark forests, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me from the trees. It was just past midnight when I saw her. She was standing at the side of the road, pale and shivering in a thin coat, her thumb out, asking for a ride. Something about her struck me as off. Her hair stuck to her face unnaturally, and her eyes seemed hollow. But I hesitated. The snowstorm had made visibility poor, and leaving her there felt cruel. I slowed down and pulled over. I rolled down the window, keeping a safe distance. "Need a ride?" I asked cautiously. She didn't respond at first, just stared at me. Her eyes reflected the dim light from my headlights, pale, almost empty. Something about her gaze made my stomach twist. "Yeah, please," she said finally, her voice barely audible over the wind. I unlocked the door, and she slid in silently. Her coat smelled faintly of damp pine and something metallic, like blood. I tried to start a conversation to break the tension, but every word I spoke seemed to vanish into the car's interior. As we drove, I noticed her hands. They rested on her lap, perfectly still, almost rigid. Her fingers were unnaturally long, knuckles white under the dim dashboard lights. Then, I saw it. The speedometer needle flickered wildly, though I hadn't touched it, and the car's heater went from full warmth to freezing cold in seconds. And she whispered something I'll never forget. I kept my eyes on the road, but I couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread. The car felt colder with every passing second, even though the heater was cranked on full. Her gaze never left the window, yet I had the chilling feeling she was staring at me from behind as well. "Where do you live?" I asked cautiously, trying to sound casual. She didn't answer, just tilted her head slightly, her hair falling over her pale face. I caught a glimpse of her eyes again, and this time they seemed too large, hollowed out as if something had been carved from them. Then I realized. Her reflection in the rearview mirror didn't match her movements. When I glanced back at her through the passenger window, she was sitting perfectly still. But the mirror showed her leaning closer to me. I swallowed hard. My pulse was hammering, but there was no turning back. The road was empty, and the storm was intensifying. "Don't look behind me," she whispered again, voice dripping with warning. The snowstorm grew heavier, visibility dropping to almost nothing. Trees loomed on either side like dark sentinels, their shadows stretching across the icy road. Every gust of wind sounded like whispers, and the car headlights barely pierced the swirling white. Suddenly, I felt a cold brush across my neck, like icy fingers grazing my skin. I spun around, but the passenger seat was empty. At least, it appeared so. She sat there perfectly still, staring forward. But her presence felt closer, almost pressing into me. My heart pounded, and I realized I couldn't remember how long we had been driving. The road seemed endless, twisting unnaturally between dense pines. I tried to ask her name, to break the tension, but the words caught in my throat. Then, without warning, she pointed to the rearview mirror. I glanced back, and my blood ran cold. A shadowy figure stood on the road behind us, too tall, too dark, following perfectly alongside the car. It had no features, just an emptiness that seemed to consume the light. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white, trying to stay calm as the shadow moved alongside the car. It didn't make a sound, didn't blink, and somehow matched every turn I made perfectly, gliding through the snow as if it didn't obey the laws of the road. The hitchhiker leaned slightly toward me, her whisper barely audible over the wind. "Don't stop." I swallowed hard, my pulse racing. Every instinct screamed that I needed to drive as fast as possible, but the icy road made it dangerous. I glanced at her face, still pale, still emotionless, yet her eyes seemed to glimmer with a knowing warning. The shadow stayed perfectly aligned with the car, drifting alongside us. It was taller than any human, its shape elongated and distorted by the storm's swirling snow. I could feel it radiating something cold, something wrong, like it was feeding off the fear in the car. I forced myself to keep my eyes forward, gripping the wheel so tight that my hands ached. The storm, the darkness, and the shadow behind us pressed down like a living weight. The road seemed endless, curving in ways that didn't make sense. Trees leaned closer, shadows twisting unnaturally in the headlights. Every time I dared to glance at the rearview mirror, the shadow's form shifted, sometimes appearing taller, sometimes bending at impossible angles. Then I noticed something worse. The hitchhiker's reflection in the mirror didn't match her body. Her head turned slowly toward me in the glass, eyes wide and black, while in reality she stared straight ahead, perfectly calm. The cold chill ran down my spine. My hands shook so badly I almost lost control of the car. I realized that she wasn't human, at least not entirely, and whatever she was, she had lured me here for a reason I couldn't yet understand. "Marcus, look behind you." Her voice was soft but commanding, vibrating deep inside my chest. Against every instinct, I resisted. My mind screamed not to obey, but a part of me feared the consequences if I didn't. The shadow in the mirror seemed to lean closer, waiting for me to turn. The wind howled through the trees, rattling the car like it wanted to shake us off the road. My hands ached from gripping the wheel, and my eyes burned from staring through the blizzard. Every instinct screamed that I should turn around or stop, but the hitchhiker's cold, unblinking stare made me hesitate. Her voice came again, soft, chilling, almost pleading. "Keep going. Don't let it touch you." I glanced at the rearview mirror. The shadow had moved closer, no longer behind the car, but alongside it, matching our speed perfectly. Its form was elongated, limbs bending at impossible angles, and a faint mist seemed to radiate from it, freezing the inside of the car despite the heater. Panic coursed through me. My foot pressed harder on the gas pedal, tires spinning on the ice. I could feel the hitchhiker's presence pressing into my mind, warning me, guiding me, controlling me. The realization hit me like a cold slap. I wasn't driving alone, and the road ahead didn't belong to the living anymore. I couldn't look at the shadow directly. It seemed to radiate darkness, sucking light into itself, bending reality around it. Every second felt like an hour as it drifted beside the car, matching every movement with terrifying precision. The hitchhiker's whisper pierced the frozen air inside the car. "It wants you to turn. Don't do it." I swallowed hard, beads of sweat freezing on my forehead. My hands shook, and the tires slipped slightly on a patch of black ice, sending the car sideways. The shadow leaned closer, and I could feel it like a weight on my chest, cold and solid. Suddenly, the storm intensified. Snow whipped across the windshield in blinding sheets, and the world outside seemed to disappear into white oblivion. The hitchhiker reached out her hand, rigid, pale, impossibly long, and touched my arm. The chill was unbearable, a sensation that felt like frostbite in an instant. But her eyes were calm, guiding me, warning me, commanding me. The road stretched ahead, empty, except for the darkness behind. The icy grip of panic tightened around my chest as the shadow pressed closer, its dark, impossible form stretching alongside the car. My foot was heavy on the accelerator, tires spinning slightly on the slick road. Every instinct screamed at me to scream, turn around or stop. But the hitchhiker's hand remained on my arm, cold and rigid, holding me back. Her whisper pierced my mind again. "It only follows fear. Don't give it to it." I realized then that the shadow wasn't just a presence. It was a predator, feeding on panic, drawn to hesitation and dread. My eyes were glued to the dark forest edges, to every flicker of movement. The blizzard outside seemed alive, wrapping the road in suffocating white. But the shadow stayed just beyond the headlights, its outline almost humanoid, but impossibly distorted. Then, suddenly, the shadow hesitated, recoiling slightly from the car as if the hitchhiker's touch was a barrier. My heart pounded. The realization hit me. She wasn't a threat. She was a protector. The storm suddenly seemed to shift. Snow swirled violently around us, then parted just enough for the road ahead to emerge. The shadow wavered, elongated, and then slowly vanished into the darkness, leaving only the echo of cold and dread. The hitchhiker's hand fell from my arm, and she turned to me, pale face calm now. She whispered one last time, "You made it. But remember me. Never pick up strangers in Frostwood." Before I could respond, she slipped from the passenger seat. I glanced over, and she was gone. The car's interior warmed immediately, and the headlights illuminated nothing but the empty, snowy road. I drove the rest of the way home in silence, my mind racing with disbelief and relief. I never saw her again, and I never picked up anyone else on Frostwood Road. But late at night, when the wind howls through the pines, I swear I can hear her whisper in the snow, warning travelers, protecting them from the shadows that stalk the night. My name is Daniel Hughes, and this happened the summer I took a solo trip to Black Pine Lake, a remote Canadian town where cabins dotted the shoreline, each isolated by dense forests. I had wanted a weekend away from city life, a chance to fish, hike, and escape all distractions. The lake was calm when I arrived, the surface reflecting the tall pines that surrounded it like dark sentinels. The cabin I rented was small but cozy, built from weathered logs perched on the edge of the water. It had no neighbors within walking distance, and the only sound was the soft lapping of water against the shore. I spent the first evening settling in, lighting a small fire and listening to the wind whisper through the trees. Nothing seemed out of place, until I noticed a faint light across the lake. It was coming from another cabin, one that didn't appear on the map, one that shouldn't exist. And yet, there it was, glowing warmly as if someone were waiting for me. Curiosity gnawed at me, but a strange unease kept me rooted to my own porch. The cabin across the lake seemed almost alive. Its windows flickered as if lit by fire, but no smoke rose from any chimney. The closer I looked, the more I realized something was wrong with its shape. The walls seemed slightly crooked, the roof oddly high in the center, almost as if it were leaning toward me. I considered ignoring it, telling myself it was just a trick of the reflection on the water. Yet, an irrational pull urged me to investigate. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the water's edge, where a small canoe was tied to a post. As I pushed off, the water rippled unnaturally, reflecting shadows that weren't mine. The cabin's light seemed to pulse, growing brighter as I approached. Every stroke of the paddle brought me closer, and every stroke amplified the feeling that something was watching me. Waiting. As I neared the cabin, the water beneath the canoe grew unnaturally still, as if the lake itself was holding its breath. The light from the distant windows flickered again, pulsing in rhythm with my racing heart. Every shadow along the shoreline seemed to twist toward me, stretching unnaturally with the dim glow of the cabin. When I finally reached the shore, I tied the canoe to a weathered post and stepped onto the soft, wet sand. The ground felt colder than it should have, and a thin mist curled around my boots. The cabin's front door was slightly ajar, and an unmistakable scent of burning pine drifted out, mixed with something sweet, almost metallic. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to retreat to the safety of my own cabin, yet a magnetic pull urged me forward. I reached for the door handle, my fingers trembling, and as I touched it, the door creaked open on its own, revealing darkness that seemed to swallow the weak glow of my flashlight. Inside, the cabin was empty. At least it appeared so. The floorboards creaked under my weight, the walls lined with old, warped wood that seemed to pulse slightly in the dim light. The air was thick and heavy, carrying a faint echo of whispers I couldn't understand. I noticed the fireplace first. The fire had long since died, but the ashes shifted subtly, as if stirred by an unseen hand. Then I saw markings on the walls, symbols I didn't recognize, drawn in what looked like a dark, sticky substance. A sudden chill ran down my spine, and I turned toward the far corner. There, a shadow detached itself from the darkness, slinking along the wall. It moved unnaturally, bending in ways that no human could. I realized with a sinking feeling that the cabin wasn't just abandoned, it was alive, and whatever had been waiting for me wasn't human. A voice whispered from the shadows. "You shouldn't have come." My heart pounded so loudly, I thought it might echo through the cabin. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the warped wooden floor. The shadow moved closer, its edges flickering like smoke caught in dim light. I could feel a presence pressing into my mind, urging fear, testing my resolve. I tried to steady my breathing and called out, my voice trembling. "Who's there?" The cabin responded with a low, guttural laugh, vibrating through the floorboards and walls. The markings on the walls seemed to writhe in the flickering light, like they were alive, moving toward me. A cold wind gusted through the room, though the windows were closed tight. Papers on the floor lifted as if pushed by invisible hands, swirling in chaotic patterns. The shadow now had a form, elongated and twisting impossibly, like a nightmare made flesh. I realized with dread that leaving might not be as simple as retracing my steps to the canoe. Whatever haunted this cabin didn't want me to leave, and it wouldn't let me. I backed toward the door, but the cabin seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls bending slightly, as if the room itself was alive. Each step I took was echoed by a soft, malicious whisper, repeating my name over and over, low and urgent. The shadow advanced silently, and I could feel the cold radiating from it, like a frozen weight pressing against my chest. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving only the dim glow from the warped windows. Panic surged, and I realized my heartbeat had synchronized with the pulsing light, the cabin feeding on my fear. I stumbled over a loose floorboard, and the shadow lunged closer, moving faster than any living creature could. I barely managed to regain my footing, and in that instant, I noticed something terrifying. The cabin wasn't empty. Figures, transparent, human-like, twisted, lined the walls, watching me silently with hollow eyes. The voice whispered again, "You can't leave." Not yet. The figures along the walls seemed to shift, leaning forward as if hungry for movement, their hollow eyes tracking my every tremble. My hands shook violently as I reached for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The cabin itself seemed to pulse, walls bending inward, ceiling stretching higher. The shadow coalesced into a form, taller and darker than anything human, limbs twisting at impossible angles. It loomed over me, radiating an ice-cold dread that pressed into my chest, forcing me to my knees. A whisper, soft yet terrifying, slithered through the room. "You came here alone. Now you belong." I slammed my hands against the warped door, and the figures reacted violently, recoiling, shrieking in silent terror. The shadow writhed, and for a brief moment, the cabin seemed unstable, almost alive with rage. I realized then that my only chance was to break the connection between the cabin and me. Summoning every ounce of courage, I lunged toward the nearest window, smashing it with my shoulder. Cold air and lake mist poured in, cutting through the oppressive darkness. The moment the window shattered, the cabin screamed in silence. The walls twisted violently, as if the structure itself was retaliating. The shadow recoiled, the hollow figures dissipating into thin air. I didn't wait to see more. I dove through the broken window onto the cold, wet ground. The night air hit me like a wave, sharp and icy, and I scrambled toward my canoe tied to the shore. The light from the mysterious cabin flickered and then vanished completely, leaving only the dark, empty shoreline and the whispering wind through the pines. I paddled frantically, the water slapping against the canoe as if urging me to escape faster. Behind me, the lake was calm again, reflecting only the moon and the dark forest, giving no sign that the cabin had ever existed. Even now, I don't know if it was a hallucination, a trap, or something far darker, but I will never forget the feeling of being watched, hunted, and almost consumed by that vanishing cabin. I paddled back toward my own cabin, heart hammering, limbs trembling from adrenaline and cold. The night seemed unnaturally quiet, the snow-dusted pines standing as silent witnesses to what I had just survived. I kept glancing behind me, expecting the shadow or the figures to reappear on the lake. But there was nothing, just the smooth, black reflection of the water. When I reached my cabin and stepped inside, I collapsed onto the wooden floor, shivering violently. The fire I had left smoldering had died, leaving only the faint smell of smoke and damp wood. I thought I was safe. I told myself the whole night had been a vivid hallucination, a trick of isolation and exhaustion. But then I noticed it. On my wall, where nothing had been before, were the same dark symbols I had seen in the vanishing cabin. My stomach sank, and I realized, with a dread I couldn't shake, that whatever haunted that place had followed me, or marked me. I never slept that night. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of the wind, sounded like the footsteps of the vanishing cabin itself. The cymbals glowed faintly in the moonlight, pulsing with a slow, deliberate rhythm. I knew then that the cabin was more than a place. It was an entity, a living nightmare that could reach beyond its own walls. By morning, I forced myself to leave, abandoning the cabin, the lake, and the town entirely. Even as I drove away, the memory of the warped walls, the ghostly figures, and the shadow lingered like a weight pressing against my chest. I never returned to Black Pine Lake, and I never spoke of what I saw to anyone. But sometimes, when the wind whispers through the trees or mist rises off the water, I swear I hear the soft, taunting voice of that vanishing cabin calling me back. And I know, deep down, that if I ever did, it would take me completely. My name is Laura Bennett, and this happened the summer I moved to Maple Creek, a small Canadian town surrounded by dense forests and winding creeks. I had just inherited my grandmother's old cabin on the outskirts, and I wanted to spend a quiet month there, working on my writing and enjoying the solitude. The town itself was quaint, with its cobblestone streets and historic homes. But the forest beyond the edge of town had a reputation. Locals whispered about disappearances, strange lights, and voices that carried through the trees at night. I didn't believe in such tales until the first night I stayed alone. Around midnight, I woke to a soft whispering, faint at first, drifting from the forest edge. It wasn't words I could understand, just a hissing, melodic tone, almost like 100 voices speaking in unison, surrounding me from every direction. My cabin door rattled as if pushed by an unseen hand, and the shadows outside seemed to stretch unnaturally toward the windows. I sat frozen, unsure whether to call for help or hide silently under the covers. I told myself it was just the wind, that my imagination was running wild after moving to such a remote location. But the whispers grew louder, circling the cabin as if the forest itself was alive. My dog Max growled lowly, hackles raised, ears flat against his head. He refused to leave my side. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside onto the porch, scanning the tree line. The moonlight barely penetrated the dense canopy, but I could see faint figures shifting between the trees, always staying just beyond reach. Every time I moved closer to get a better look, they seemed to vanish, leaving only a faint rustle of leaves. Then I heard it clearly, a voice whispering my name, Laura, in a tone both gentle and menacing. I froze, heart racing, unable to discern the direction. The forest felt alive, watching, waiting. I realized that whatever was out there, it didn't want to harm me immediately. It was hunting, studying, and playing with fear. The whispering didn't stop, no matter how far I walked. I grabbed Max's leash and tried to follow the sound into the edge of the forest, my flashlight slicing through the darkness, revealing twisted tree trunks and thick underbrush. The voices seemed to move with me, circling, laughing softly, always just out of reach. Suddenly, I saw movement, a shadow darting between two pines. It was fast, unnaturally so, and when I swung the flashlight toward it, nothing was there. My pulse quickened. The whispers grew urgent, almost frantic, like a warning, but also a lure. I felt drawn deeper, compelled to enter the forest against every instinct screaming at me to flee. I stumbled over roots and moss-covered rocks, and the whispers intensified, now almost forming words I couldn't comprehend, their tone both familiar and alien. Max barked frantically, ears pinned back, growling at something invisible. But I couldn't see it. The forest seemed alive, breathing, watching, ready to consume anything foolish enough to enter its heart. I paused at a small clearing, gasping for breath. The whispers had stopped for a moment, replaced by a hollow silence that pressed against my ears. Then I realized something terrifying. The trees around the clearing seemed to have shifted, rearranged, forming a circle that trapped me. Every exit was blocked by dense trunks and twisted roots. Max whimpered, pressing close to my legs, his fur bristling. I shone the flashlight toward the forest edges and saw figures, barely human, half hidden behind trees, watching. Their eyes reflected faint glimmers of light, unblinking. And I understood that the whispers were theirs. They had been drawing me in, studying my fear, learning my patterns. A sudden gust of icy wind swept through the clearing, carrying the whispers back, louder, almost chanting. I realized with dread that I was in the heart of the forest now, a place where those who didn't belong were prey, and the woods were preparing to teach me a lesson I might not survive. Panic surged through me, but I knew standing still would be fatal. I grabbed Max's leash tightly and forced myself to move, trying to push through the twisted forest. The trees seemed to shift and sway unnaturally, closing in around me, their branches clawing like skeletal hands. Every step triggered whispers, soft at first, then rising into a cacophony of voices all around me, repeating my name, mocking my fear, and pressing into my mind. Suddenly, the ground beneath me gave way slightly, and I stumbled into a shallow pit hidden by fallen leaves. Max barked furiously, his nails scraping the dirt as he tried to pull me out. From the edge of the clearing, the shadowy figures emerged, moving silently, their forms elongated and distorted, gliding over the forest floor with impossible speed. The whispers became intelligible for the first time. "You shouldn't be here. This is ours." I realized with horror that the forest wasn't just alive, it was intelligent, hunting and feeding on fear. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering, adrenaline surging. The forest seemed to pulse, the shadows of the figures stretching across the trunks like dark rivers. I knew I had to escape, but every direction I tried led me back into the clearing. The whispers intensified, now a chorus of warning and malice, echoing from every tree, every branch, every shadow. Max growled, low and fierce, lunging at something invisible. The shadowy figures recoiled slightly, hissing at him, giving me a momentary opening. I bolted through the narrow path between two massive pines, branches whipping my face, roots catching my feet. The forest seemed to resist, the underbrush tightening, branches bending, almost pushing me back into the circle of shadows. I could hear their whispers, a single chilling phrase repeating, "You belong to the woods." I ran faster, tripping and falling, the cold dirt and leaves scraping my skin, desperate to reach the edge where the forest would finally release me. Or so I hoped. I burst through a thick copse of trees and stumbled into a small creek, the icy water soaking my legs. The forest behind me erupted with movement. Shadows sliding along the trunks, whispers rising into an ear-piercing crescendo. I could feel the intelligence behind the forest, the malicious awareness, as if it knew my every thought, every fear. Max barked and growled, alerting me to something moving in the water. I shined my flashlight and saw reflections of faces in the ripples, pale and twisted, mouths whispering my name. Panic threatened to paralyze me, but I forced my legs to move, climbing up the muddy bank and breaking into a clearing I hadn't seen before. Then I realized something worse. The clearing wasn't empty. The twisted, ghostly figures now surrounded me, emerging from the mist, their elongated forms swaying unnaturally. I understood with a sinking horror that the forest had trapped me in its very heart, and it was ready to claim me as its own. Desperation took hold. I realized I had to confront the fear rather than flee blindly. I yelled at the shadows, my voice cracking but determined. "Leave us alone. You don't own me." The figures paused, swaying as if considering my words. The whispers slowed, fading into a low hum, and the air grew colder, sharper, almost like the forest itself was testing my courage. Max growled but stayed at my side, a small anchor of reality in the surreal nightmare. Suddenly, one of the figures stepped forward. A shape more human than the others, its eyes hollow yet intelligent. It whispered in a voice both melodic and threatening. "Bravery can save you. For now. But remember, the woods never forget." Then, as quickly as it appeared, the figure vanished into the mist. The other shadows dissolved into the trees, and the forest fell silent once more, leaving me alone, trembling and aware that my life had been spared. But only temporarily. I stumbled out of the clearing, heart pounding, adrenaline still surging. But I knew the forest hadn't let me go yet. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping branch sounded like footsteps following me, whispering my name in that melodic, haunting tone. Max stayed close, his low growl a constant reminder that danger was near, even if I couldn't see it. The trees seemed endless, stretching farther than I remembered from the day before. Every turn led me deeper into the labyrinth of shadow and mist. I realized the forest wasn't just a place. It was a predator, a sentient maze designed to trap anyone who entered. The whispers had returned, now urgent and insistent, circling me like a storm, reminding me that I had trespassed. Finally, I spotted a faint glow ahead. The edge of the forest. My legs burned, my lungs screamed for air, but I ran, ignoring the chilling whispers that clung to me, fading only when I burst into the safety of moonlit fields beyond the trees. I didn't stop running until I reached the small road leading back to Maple Creek. Only when the warm glow of the town's streetlights met my eyes did I feel a flicker of safety. I collapsed onto the roadside, gasping, Max pressing close, his fur still bristling. Even then, I could hear faint whispers carried by the wind, teasing me, reminding me that the forest remembered. The shadows, the hollow-eyed figures, the intelligence lurking among the trees, they were patient. They would wait. They would watch. I left Maple Creek soon after, never returning to that cabin or that cursed forest. But sometimes, in dreams or when the wind whistles through the pines, I can still hear them calling my name, testing my courage, reminding me of their presence. I know now that some forests are not just trees and wildlife. They are sentient, patient, and hungry. And the whispering woods will always remember those who enter. My name is Ethan Cole, and this happened the winter I volunteered to restore the old train station in Frost Hollow, a tiny, nearly abandoned Canadian town where the tracks disappeared into the snow-laden woods. I had always loved history and old railways, and the station seemed perfect for a winter project. The town itself was silent, the streets empty except for the occasional stray dog or snowdrift. But locals whispered about the tracks, about phantom trains that roared through the station at night, with no engineer, no passengers, and no origin or destination. They said anyone who heard them was either driven mad or disappeared entirely. I laughed at these warnings. Superstitions, I told myself. The first night in the station, I heard it. At first, a faint rumble, low and distant, vibrating through the wooden beams. Then a whistle, piercing and mournful, cutting through the still night. The sound came closer, though no train was visible. My flashlight trembled in my hands, and for the first time, I felt real, creeping fear. I stepped outside, trying to convince myself it was an echo of the wind or snow sliding off the roof. but the ground trembled under my feet, and the rumble intensified, growing louder with every heartbeat. The whistle blew again, longer this time, mournful, almost calling my name. I followed the tracks cautiously, the snow crunching beneath my boots, and saw a faint shimmer along the rails. A pale light glowed, as if illuminating a train that wasn't there. I could see the shape of the carriages, blurred and flickering, like smoke and ice combined. No driver, no passengers, but the presence was undeniably there, watching, waiting. I wanted to retreat, but my feet moved forward. The whispers of the wind seemed to form words, warning me, beckoning me. Do not ride. Do not follow. My skin prickled, every nerve alert, and I realized the phantom train of Frost Hollow was no mere legend. It was real. The snow crunched under my boots as I cautiously followed the faint glow along the tracks. The air was cold, sharp, biting at my skin, but the fear inside me burned hotter. The phantom train was closer now. I could hear the metallic screech of wheels on rails echoing in the still night, though the tracks were empty. Then I noticed movement inside the carriages, shadows flitting past frosted windows, figures that were there and not there at the same time. My heart hammered, and a cold dread settled in my chest. Every instinct told me to run, but my curiosity rooted me to the spot. A ghostly whistle blew, shrill and bone-chilling, vibrating through the station and surrounding woods. The train didn't stop, yet I could feel its presence, aware of me, watching, waiting. It wasn't just a hallucination. It was an entity, sentient and malevolent, dragging the past along its tracks into the present. I realized I had to choose. Turn back into the silent town or step closer and face the unimaginable. I took a hesitant step closer, the frozen ground crunching loudly beneath me. The train seemed to pulse with life, a frozen heartbeat emanating from its spectral form. I could feel its energy, like static crawling under my skin. Every step brought the train closer, though no wheels turned, no engine moved. It slid forward as if powered by some unseen force, bending reality around it. Then I noticed a shape at the front of the train, a shadowy figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing at the controls. Its head turned slowly, hollow eyes locking onto mine. I stumbled back, a chill racing up my spine. The whispering wind carried a voice. You shouldn't be here. But now that you are, I realized with a shiver that the train wasn't just passing through. It was studying me, testing me, deciding whether I belonged on the rails with the lost souls trapped inside its carriages. I felt my resolve faltering as the icy wind lashed my face. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, but the train seemed to respond to my fear. The snow beneath my feet shifted unnaturally, like the ground itself was moving, guiding me closer to the glowing carriages. The shadows inside danced and twisted, whispering names, faces, and memories I didn't recognize, yet somehow felt personal, as if the train knew my deepest fears. Max growled low, pressing close to my legs, but even he shivered at the palpable malevolence in the air. I forced myself to step forward again, irrationally thinking I could confront it or perhaps find a way to escape its gaze. The shadowy figure at the front moved closer to the edge of the engine, raising a hand that seemed to bend the night itself, pulling icy wind and snow in spirals around us. Then the whisper came. Clearer this time, a voice like metal scraping on stone. Step aboard. If you dare. I froze, torn between fleeing and the terrifying compulsion that the train held over me. The whistle blew again, shrill and deafening, shaking the trees and rattling my bones. I stumbled back, falling into the snow, feeling the ghostly pull of the train trying to draw me onto the tracks. The shadows inside the carriages pressed against the frosted windows as if reaching for me. Elongated fingers barely visible in the spectral light. My chest tightened with a panic I had never known. I scrambled to my feet and ran along the edge of the tracks, trying to put distance between me and the impossible apparition. Yet, no matter how fast I ran, the train seemed to glide effortlessly, maintaining its looming presence just behind me, the lights flickering in sync with my heartbeat. The shadow at the front raised its hand again, and I felt the cold press deeper into my skin, freezing my thoughts, whispering promises of oblivion. I knew if it caught me, I would vanish, become another ghost aboard the eternal wandering phantom train of Frost Hollow. Exhaustion and terror collided as I sprinted through the snow, but the train matched my pace without effort. The shadows inside grew clearer now. Twisted, frozen faces of passengers staring outward, mouths open in silent screams. It was impossible, yet undeniable. These souls were trapped, lost forever, their agony feeding the train's power. I tripped over a hidden rail tie and slid across the icy ground, scrambling to my feet as the train's whistle blew again, a bone-chilling wail that seemed to pierce my very soul. The shadow at the front raised its arm, and suddenly the train surged forward faster than possible, moving as if reality itself bent to its will. My mind screamed to stop, to flee, but I couldn't resist glancing into one carriage. For a heartbeat, I saw a mirror of myself inside, eyes wide with terror, screaming silently. Then the figure at the front extended a hand toward me, the mist wrapping around it like grasping fingers. I knew then that the train would not let me leave without a fight I was barely prepared to win. With my heart racing, I seized a moment of courage. I leapt to the side, narrowly avoiding the spectral grasp, and ran toward a line of dense pine trees that bordered the tracks. The train's speed faltered slightly, as if aware of my defiance, and the shadows inside writhed, twisting in fury. The wind screamed around me, carrying whispers of anger and sorrow, as if the forest itself had joined in the train's malevolent will. I ducked behind a tree, gasping, praying it wouldn't find me here. For the first time, the train seemed to hesitate, its spectral glow flickering erratically, shadows jerking like marionettes. Then the shadow at the front spoke, voice low and grinding, almost human. "You may escape, this time, but the tracks remember your name. We always know where you are." And with that, the train began to fade into the mist, leaving only the cold, silent snow and the echo of that unearthly whistle behind me. I didn't move for what felt like hours, just listening to the fading whistle echo through the snow-covered forest. The cold seeped into my bones, but the lingering presence of the phantom train kept my blood running hot with terror. I knew that even though it had receded, it hadn't released me entirely. Its awareness stretched beyond the tracks, beyond the station, as if it could track me anywhere. Eventually, I forced myself to move, stumbling along the snowy path back to Frost Hollow. Every step was haunted by the ghostly visions from the train. Faces staring, hands pressing against invisible windows, whispers calling my name, promising that the rails would find me. I realized that this wasn't just a local legend. It was an eternal predator, feeding on fear, a moving prison for the lost and curious. By the time I reached the town, dawn was breaking, painting the snow in pale gold. Yet the terror lingered, a cold shadow under my skin. I had escaped. For now, I never returned to the train station at Frost Hollow. The town seemed quiet, ordinary, but I knew better now. The phantom train existed beyond reason, outside time, ready to strike at anyone who ventured too close to its tracks. Even now, years later, I hear the faint whistle in the wind when winter storms roll through the forest. Sometimes in dreams, I see the glowing carriages, the hollow-eyed shadows, and the elongated figure at the front, waiting patiently for me to wander too close again. I understand that curiosity and fear are its fuel, and that anyone who dares to follow the tracks risks vanishing into eternity. I've told a few people my story, but most laugh or dismiss it as imagination. I don't blame them. They don't hear the whispering wheels in the dead of night. But I do. And I know that Frost Hollow's phantom train will never forget me. My name is Isabella Hayes, and this happened the winter I took a short research trip to Ravens Bluff, a remote Canadian coastal town known for its jagged cliffs and storm-tossed shores. I was documenting the town's lighthouse history when locals warned me about the vanishing lights along the cliffs. Mysterious lanterns that appeared on foggy nights, only for those who followed them to disappear without a trace. I laughed at the warnings. Ghost stories, I thought, perfect for dramatic research notes. But the first evening, as fog rolled in from the Atlantic, I saw them. Faint, flickering lights moving along the cliffside, glowing with an unnatural, almost hypnotic hue. They swayed and danced as though inviting me closer. My pulse quickened, an uneasy feeling crawling up my spine. Ignoring my instincts, I stepped toward the nearest light, notebook in hand, thinking I could document it. The closer I got, the colder the air became, as if the fog itself was breathing, watching, and waiting. My flashlight flickered, and for the first time, I realized the lights weren't just lanterns. They were something else entirely. I hesitated, my flashlight trembling in my hand, as the lights hovered just ahead, weaving through the thick fog. Each flicker seemed almost alive, pulsing with an eerie rhythm that mirrored my own heartbeat. I called out, hoping someone, anyone, would answer. But the sound of my voice was swallowed by the fogs and the distant crashing waves. Then I noticed movement near the cliff edge, a shadowy figure stepping out from the mist. It was tall, cloaked in dark robes that fluttered like smoke in the wind. The light seemed to emanate from it, illuminating its elongated fingers reaching toward the ocean. I stumbled backward, heart racing, the fog pressing closer, threatening to swallow me whole. The whispers started then, low and melodic, carrying over the waves. Come, follow, join us. They called my name, coaxing me toward the edge. I realized with cold clarity that these weren't ordinary lights. They were lures, traps, guiding unsuspecting victims to vanish into the cliffs below, lost forever to Ravens Bluff. I forced myself to step back from the cliff edge, the fog pressing against me like a living thing. But the lights were relentless, flickering and weaving closer, almost playful, as if mocking my fear. Each step I took backward, the whispers followed, coaxing, taunting, calling my name. My heart raced so violently it felt like it might burst. I realized that moving away only made them more insistent. The shadowy figure at the cliff's edge raised its arm, and the lights converged into a swirling mass, pulsing with an unholy energy. The whispers grew louder, forming words I could understand, chilling and seductive. Join us. See what lies beyond. Follow the light. I felt the compulsion, a magnetic pull toward the cliff, stronger with every heartbeat. Max, my guide dog, barked frantically, yanking at his leash and snapping me out of the trance. I stumbled backward again, narrowly avoiding a slick patch of rock that would have sent me over the edge. The cliff was no longer just dangerous. It was alive, aware, and hunting. I scrambled away from the cliff, my flashlight cutting through the thick fog, revealing jagged rocks and dark patches of ice. The lights hovered at a distance now, but flickered as if taunting me, daring me to look back. I could hear the shadowy figure laughing, a sound like wind over shattered glass, piercing and unnatural. The whispers followed me, carried by the gusting wind, now more insistent, almost physical, pressing against my ears and chest. Each step I took toward safety felt like wading through molasses, the fog clinging, trying to drag me back. My mind raced. Was this a supernatural phenomenon? Or was the town itself cursed? Every instinct screamed to run. But where could one escape when the mist moves like a predator? Finally, I spotted the lighthouse in the distance, its beam cutting through the fog like a knife. For the first time since the lights appeared, I felt hope. Yet the whispers reminded me that Raven's Bluff didn't give up its victims easily. I reached the edge of the town, the lighthouse's beam cutting a path through the thick fog. Yet the ghostly lights still lingered on the cliffs above. They seemed to pulse with intent, swaying closer whenever I dared glance behind me. Max tugged at his leash, whining, clearly sensing the same malevolence. The shadowy figure appeared again, now at the cliff's edge, its elongated fingers pointing directly at me. My stomach churned as I felt a pull, magnetic and irresistible, toward the ledge. The whispers grew louder, forming full sentences now, promising visions of hidden truths and untold power if I would only step closer. My feet felt rooted to the icy ground, trapped in the invisible grasp of the lights themselves. Panic surged, but I forced my legs to move toward the lighthouse, pushing against the pull. Every second felt like hours as the fog swirled, the lights darting and flickering, taunting me, testing my resolve, daring me to look away from the safety ahead. I stumbled into the lighthouse courtyard, gasping for breath, and turned back once, my heart hammering. The lights hovered at the cliff edge, flickering like angry will-o'-the-wisps. The shadowy figure raised its arm, and the fog thickened, curling around the lights as if preparing to descend upon me. The whispers became a chorus, almost deafening, promising oblivion if I dared to sleep that night. I bolted inside the lighthouse, slamming the heavy door behind me. The warmth and the strong beam of the lighthouse provided a momentary sense of security, though the whispers still seeped through the cracks, insistent and sly. I realized the lights weren't just illusions. They were intelligent, hunting and capable of bending reality to lure their prey. Max pressed against my side, growling low. I realized then that the town, the cliffs, the fog, and the vanishing lights were part of one living nightmare, waiting for the next curious soul to wander too close to the edge. I couldn't stay inside forever. The fog pressed against the lighthouse walls, carrying whispers that promised I wouldn't be safe, even indoors. I knew I had to face the lights if I wanted to leave Raven's Bluff alive. Steeling myself, I stepped back into the courtyard, Max close at my side, the wind biting through my coat. The lights danced closer, now forming a glowing path along the cliffside. The shadowy figure appeared at the edge, its hollow eyes gleaming beneath a hood of mist, as if observing my every move. I realized with a jolt that the lights were feeding off my fear, growing stronger with every falter in my courage. I clenched Max's leash and started walking slowly toward the cliff, keeping my gaze fixed on the lighthouse beacon behind me. Every step was a test, a battle between my terror and my will. The lights flickered and the whispers surged, warning me. One misstep, and you will join us forever. The wind howled violently as I approached the cliff's edge, snow swirling around my boots. The lights pulsed, almost mocking me, weaving between jagged rocks like living spirits. I felt their pull stronger than ever, a magnetic force urging me forward, promising secrets I did not want to know. Suddenly, the shadowy figure raised its arm, and the largest light split off, moving directly toward me. I froze, panic squeezing my chest, every instinct screaming to run. Max barked furiously, pulling me backward, breaking the hypnotic hold of the light for just a moment. The whispers twisted, angry now, shrill and jarring. "Do not resist. Join us." I stumbled back, eyes tearing from the icy wind, and realized the truth. The vanishing lights weren't just a lure. They were predators, intelligent and relentless, capable of bending reality to trap anyone who dared follow them. The cliff, the fog, the lights, and the figure were all part of the same predatory force, and escaping it would require courage I wasn't sure I possessed. I forced myself to step away from the cliff edge, heart hammering, Max pulling me back as if he could sense the danger far better than I could. The lights hovered above the rocks, flickering and pulsing, whispering promises and threats in a voice only I seemed to hear. I realized then that the figure and the lights weren't merely supernatural. They were aware, patient, and deliberate, testing the limits of my courage. The fog swirled violently, almost forming shapes, grotesque and fluid, as if the wind itself was alive. The lights darted in sudden bursts, pulling my gaze toward the cliff, their hypnotic allure threatening to overcome me. I had to resist, had to fight the compulsion that clawed at my mind. One misstep and I would vanish, becoming another victim of Raven's Bluff, lost forever to the fog and shadows that ruled the cliffs. Summoning every ounce of strength, I moved steadily toward the town path, leaving the swirling lights behind, but aware that they would never truly let go of me. By the time I reached the edge of Raven's Bluff, the lights had faded into the mist, their whispers echoing faintly in the crashing wind. I sank to the snowy ground, gasping, my hands numb. Max pressing close, alert and tense. I knew I had survived, but the encounter had left a permanent mark on my mind. The vanishing lights were not a legend. They were predators, patient and cunning, feeding on the curious and the reckless. Even now, years later, when fog rolls over the cliffs, I hear their whispers in the wind and see faint glimmers at the edge of my vision. I have never returned to Raven's Bluff, but I know that the lights still wait, hunting for the next soul foolish enough to follow. Their hunger is eternal, and the cliffside remembers. I have told my story cautiously, warning others. Some believe, some dismiss it. But I know the truth. The vanishing lights of Raven's Bluff never forget those who cross their path.